Hello, everyone. The first thing I would like to do is just say thank you to each and every one of you for being willing to be a part of my research. I know that time is precious in graduate school, so the fact that you are willing to help me out means the absolute world to me. So thank you, thank you, thank you. The reason I'm making this video is because, as you all know, I am interested in Richard and Janice Haswell's hospitality as a theoretical framework for teaching writing instruction. And I know that you all were exposed to some information about hospitality in your 604 class. You read 2 chapters. However, that was quite a while ago, so I thought I would do my best to make a video that gives kind of a refresher on what exactly hospitality is about. So let's jump in. Welcome to Edwards Research, we're gonna have some fun. Welcome to Edwards Research, we're gonna learn a ton. Welcome, 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 welcome to my research. So one of the things to note about Richard and Janice Haswell's conception of hospitality is that it is different from a lot of the associations most people might have with the term hospitality. So it's not this.
One of these days, it's just going to be like...
So can I get you gentlemen something more to drink? Or maybe something to nibble on? Some pizza shooters, shrimp poppers, or extreme fajitas?
Going into more detail, hospitality is not meant as being something associated with tourist industries, social events to network, or trying to curry favor with someone or win them over to a certain ideological perspective. It also is not something meant to be commercial, political, or colonizing, such as, and this is coming from the text, lodging travelers for money, wining and dining friends, or missionizing in foreign lands. They also draw from 3 historic traditions, including Homeric or warrior hospitality, Judeo-Christian or biblical hospitality, and nomadic or Central and Eastern Asian hospitality. So this first historical mode of hospitality, Homeric or warrior hospitality, you first might think of the Iliad or the Odyssey if you ever were to have read one of those. It typically involves a feast where there is a sharing of meat. There's bounty that is a measure of glory and fame for everyone involved, and it's sort of designed to solidify bonds of loyalty among independent bands of warriors and between the warriors and the kings. Now, clearly, Homeric or warrior hospitality functions in a closed circle, and it is exclusive in many regards, specifically given that gift-giving happens only between relative equals in that culture. So anyone marginal to the warrior class, that is the poor, the non-military, women, and the powerless, have no place at the feast in this context. However, in the Judeo-Christian or biblical hospitality, we find a less exclusionary mode of host-guest relations. Drawing from the Old Testament in Genesis 18, we are exposed to the story of Abraham offering shelter, water, food, and other help to 3 strangers who, after some time, transform into angels and tell Abraham he will have a son. This creates a lesson that persists into the New Testament, not to be fearful of strangers and taking care of them because who knows, they could be angels. In a larger Christian sense, moreover, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, and visiting the sick is undertaken not necessarily in the hopes of entertaining angels in disguise, but simply in service to Christ. The guest, the stranger, even the enemy is now wreathed with an ethos of utmost dignity. If you're familiar, you might draw from the New Testament parable of the Good Samaritan. And finally, there is nomadic hospitality, or Central and Eastern Asian hospitality. One of the major examples offered for this is Bedouin culture, which typically involves a host providing food, shelter, and drink to any wandering stranger without question, a tradition that persists today and allows guests to stay for up to 3 days. Typically, this interaction involves a gift or some sort of exchange whereby the guest offers information to their host, and that could be in the form of stories, their own cultural customs, or happenings occurring outside the encampment. Undergirding this exchange is the usual assumption that future circumstances might place the host in the land of the guest, whereby roles become exchanged. Now, to advance hospitality as a theoretical framework, Richard and Janice Haswell draw from an assortment of thinkers to establish hospitality's philosophical and even theological foundations. Most notably, French philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, in his work Totality and Infinity, explores the idea of the self and other, and this finds a direct connection to hospitality's host and guest. Ultimately, Levinas prizes the face-to-face encounter with the other as a privileged phenomenon from which ethics are derived. For Levinas, the interaction or conversation with the other, or thou, invites a displacement from one's totality into infinity. In other words, wholeheartedly meeting the other is an intimate, unpredictable, and creative enterprise which represents a radical relationship whereby an individual must be open to entering a space outside of themselves, beyond their fixed preconceptions, comforts, biases, and values, into an unknown or an infinity. To a significant but lesser extent, Jacques Derrida's Of Hospitality also informs Haswell and Haswell's work. The authors use Derrida's ideas to note hospitality's long-held historic significance and to distinguish differences in hospitality as a means for social utility rather than an exemplary moral action. Derrida is quick to point out how many acts of hospitality may ostensibly appear to exhibit this unconditional quality, but in actuality represent an exchange between host and guest imposed by right or law, such as asylum seeking. Finally, the observations and insights from Dutch Catholic priest, theologian, and professor Henry Nouwen serve as a repeated reference point for Haswell and Haswell. Usually in these contexts, Nouwen's writings operate not so much to add new theoretical dimensions to hospitality, so much as they enliven and clarify what radical hospitality can look like in material form. Specifically, Nouwen's works and observations into the ethics of counseling and pastoral care shed light onto the role of host in hospitality. Nouwen, for example, describes the ideal minister as a host who, quote, heals, sustains, and guides, end quote, yet claims these feats can only be accomplished when one rejects the need to maintain control or have all the answers. For Nouwen, who spent a significant portion of his life living and communing with people with disabilities at L'Arche community in France, quote, someone who is filled with ideas, concepts, opinions, and convictions cannot be a good host. There is no inner space to listen, no openness to discover the gift of others, end quote. Now, working towards a more pedagogical bent, Richard and Janice Haswell distinguish three types of hospitality. So first, there is intellectual hospitality, and this refers to a teacher establishing room and welcoming new and different ideas. So for teachers, a disposition of intellectual hospitality is especially paramount because it requires inviting novel or developing ideas from students. Now, this challenges, quote, the fatal expectation that knowledge transfer is a one-way street from teacher to student. In a similar vein, the second is transformative hospitality, and this assumes that within these pedagogical interactions, change or alteration will happen both for the student and the teacher. This works against, quote, the image of teachers as books of knowledge, available to be opened and read, but fixed in time, not a word or comma open to change. And then finally, there is Ubuntu hospitality. This draws from the South African folk ethic Ubuntu, where compassion and understanding are fostered by a rich and deep awareness of our interconnected and shared humanity. Haswell and Haswell aptly point out how it was Ubuntu philosophy which underscored and helped facilitate the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of post-apartheid South Africa. So Haswell and Haswell tried to go even further by giving some sort of concreteness to what hospitality might look like in situations of teaching writing. And so they offer 4 characteristics dubbed the 4 R's. These are risk-taking, restlessness, resistance, and retreat. Now, risk-taking for the authors is essential because in many respects, hospitality is an uncertain enterprise, and it could potentially be a vulnerable positioning for both the host and the guest. And this could involve some level for risk or danger, potentially. Also, varying levels of restlessness might be felt throughout for both the host and the guest, and even after the engagement, as both subjects are subject to change, potentially. often which is a uncomfortable process. The third characteristic, resistance, refers not necessarily to resisting the other or the thou, but instead means resisting impulses to categorize or make assumptions before knowing the other or thou. This typically requires a level of suspended judgment and asks a host to acknowledge and relish the shock of difference. Finally, retreat, in contrast to potential militaristic associations, refers to a religious retreat to the margins, as hospitality often includes a blurring or even disintegration of understood roles between host and guest. So, to sum up, Hoswell and Hoswell first give 3 historic modes of hospitality, including Homeric or warrior hospitality, Judeo-Christian or biblical hospitality, and nomadic or East and Asian hospitality. They also draw from thinkers Emmanuel Levinas, Jacques Derrida, and Henry Nouwen. They then offer 3 types of hospitality geared towards pedagogy, which include intellectual hospitality, transformative hospitality, and Ubuntu hospitality. Finally, they offer the 4 R's for classroom practices, which include risk-taking, restlessness, resistance, and retreat. That was a lot. Thank you all so much for watching this. Please know that you do not have to remember all of this. I just hope it was refreshing and that it will be something that will be useful as we move into our focus group. Again, thank you so much for watching.